Today I'm not done. I'm sitting down with one of the most influential leaders in global travel, Tony Capuano, CEO of Marriott International, the largest hotel brand company in the world with almost 10,000 hotels. And I'm reminded that even in a world of AI, that being authentic and maniacally focused on the customer are still the keys to success. Because at the end of the day, people are and always will be the essence of hospitality. We talk about short-term turbulence in the US, sure, but how in the mid and long term, the outlook for travel globally and domestically remains incredibly strong. It's part of our DNA. We're explorers, we're connectors, we want to see places. And Tony also shares some famous quotes from Mr. Marriott himself that still stands the test of time. With that, let's get on with the show. Well, welcome to the Not Done podcast. Today I've got Tony Capuano, CEO of Marriott International. Tony, the last time you and I were together in person, we were at the MINA conference in Grand Cayman, had dinner with you. Have you been since last I saw you?
Busy as ever, as you would expect. Just wrapped up a big week. We had earnings this week and our board meeting. We took our board to the reimagined W Union Square in New York, which was terrific. Rolling along. I think I've been in about a dozen countries or so since the last time I saw you.
I follow you on LinkedIn, and so I see you were in Asia, and you're always out and about meeting with customers and investors. It's awesome to see. I'm excited to talk about all things hospitality business today, leadership, AI. But I'd love to maybe start with a couple of fun facts about yourself for those that don't know about your personal story.
Sure. So born and raised right here in Maryland. I'm a kid from Baltimore. And when I was born, my dad was a student at Hopkins. So we lived in my grandparents' row house in Little Italy here in Baltimore. Grew up as a lacrosse player, ended up at the Cornell Hotel School almost by accident. My dad used to commute with the lead lobbyist for AH&LA when I was a high school kid, and he was the one that recommended Cornell. And while I spent every summer in operations, I really gravitated towards the deal side of the business. And so when I graduated, I went to work for Laventhal and Horwath, which, as you know, at the time was the premier hospitality consulting firm. I was in their Boston office, and I think after 4 years in Ithaca and 2 years in Boston, I'd had enough. So packed up my car and drove to LA and ended up joining Kenneth Leventhal before they were acquired by EY in their hospitality practice, and then joined Marriott in 95.
And I think you've been at Marriott now for over 30 years, is that right?
Yeah, February will be 31 years.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, Tony, I want to talk about the industry a bit. U.S. industry RevPAR has been negative or kind of flatlining the last several months, going back to Q2. What are you seeing domestically as the biggest opportunities for hotel owners and possibly some of the headwinds that we're seeing as well?
Yeah, I mean, as you know well, our industry, our sector, our vertical, they thrive best in times of stability and high consumer confidence. The economic situation, the socio-political situation is not providing much of either of those. I think it was a quarter or two ago, I saw that the U.S. had hit a 50-year low in consumer confidence. And I think all of those factors are making the operating environment challenging. Often, I do interviews and I get accused of being a bit too much of an optimist, but I actually think the performance we're seeing in the face of all that instability and all of those headwinds, we actually ought to feel pretty good about the medium to long term of travel, notwithstanding the short-term turbulence. But I think embedded in your question is maybe the area that our team is most focused on, and that's around not just reminding ourselves how our associates are feeling, how our guests are feeling, but how our owners are feeling. And, knock on wood, we'll have another terrific year at Marriott International in terms of our EBITDA growth. But the encouragement I give to our teams is take about 1 second to celebrate that and then pivot to thinking about the relative condition of our owner community, because that's a community that has seen billions and billions of dollars of asset and enterprise value evaporate as a result of first the pandemic, now just some of the macroeconomic uncertainty. And so every day we wake up, I say this all the time. Every decision of consequence we make, we look at through the lens of how it's going to impact our associates, how it's going to impact our guests, and how it's going to impact our owner.
Yeah, that's well said. I always would quote when I was meeting with staff at the hotel, Mr. Marriott, how he would say, take care of the associate will take care of the guest, and the rest will take care of itself. That's a little bit of a generalization, but he's so true in that factor.
Well, and it's interesting. I have one of the great privileges of this job is I get to talk to him almost every week. And one of the things he does is he always calls me after the earnings call for a little post-game analysis, I suppose. And this was a year or two ago, and we didn't have a bad earnings call, but we got beat up a little bit. And I was talking to him, and I must have sighed audibly in the course of our conversation. And he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Oh, it's just a complicated damn business we have." And in his normal sort of simple, wise way, what he said to me was, "Doesn't have to be that complicated." And I said, "What do you mean?" And it sort of goes to the quote that you shared. He said, if we really are hiring amazing associates, we're training them, we're giving them the tools to do their job, and we're inspiring them to provide extraordinary, genuine care to our guests, that solves 90% of the complexity, and there's a lot of wisdom in that point of view.
Well said. If we come back to the industry, if you look at the class segments in the United States, luxury has performed the best the last couple of quarters. And you then have, economy is substantially underperforming. I think inflation and then the average U.S. consumer obviously not feeling great right now. And folks that travel to luxury hotels tend to have a lot of assets. So inflation in some way benefits them. How are you seeing the industry from the various classes of hotels?
As you know, this year we moved into mid-scale. So we've got a pretty broad range of representation. The way I think about it, I suppose, both as a societal issue and an industry issue, you've got this bifurcation of the consumer. And so the high-income households, well, to be sure, they're watching all of the macroeconomic uncertainty. They're feeling reasonably confident, and that confidence is reflected in their spending. We did earnings on Tuesday, and we talked about luxury another consecutive quarter being the best performing sector. I think RevPAR in luxury was up about 4%. And that is reflective of the relative confidence of the consumer at that end of the economic spectrum. At the other end of the economic spectrum, in more modest income households, I suppose the good news for our industry is even at that end of the spectrum, there is still a fundamental desire to travel, but there is significantly more uncertainty and more impact of the economic headwinds on that consumer, and they are often having to make tougher choices that may exclude travel decisions or travel expenditures, and that's really reflected in the weaker performance you see in the lower chain scales.
If we pivot to maybe hotel development or new hotel development, mortgage rates have been elevated for several years now. Construction costs kind of took off. Supply growth, I think, being muted, at least in the midterm, seems to be a good tailwind for U.S. hotel owners because it's, I think, at 0.7% and historically is closer to 2%. But you guys have been exceptional in your net unit growth numbers. What is your perspective on hotel development in the U.S.? Because it has been a real problem the last couple of years. It's been a struggle to get any project done.
Yeah, it sure has. Maybe I'll start macro and then whittle my answer down to the U.S. One of the great benefits of our industry-leading scale is the breadth of our global footprint. We operate in about 143 countries around the world today. When you look at our pipeline, which is almost 600,000 rooms now, there's another 20-some-odd countries that we'll soon be operating in. And so when you look at our global NUG numbers, we're taking advantage of the strength in markets like across Asia Pacific, including Greater China. I mean, the Greater China story is fascinating. It's a really tough operating environment, but we're setting records in terms of our deal volume across Greater China. The balance of Asia markets like Japan, Indonesia, Thailand, India, we're seeing really strong momentum. And then you pivot to the Middle East, the UAE, Qatar, you're seeing terrific traction there. And so that dollar cost averaging, if you will, of having a global footprint is one of the big contributors to the strength of our net unit growth. The other big contributor is our focus on conversions, and that's a global focus. And while conversions have always been part of our growth story, if we're fair with ourselves, maybe a decade or so ago, the conversion story would have been a hair more reactive. It is fully proactive today. And so you take the way we have have sharpened the focus of our teams on both individual asset and portfolio conversions. You look at all the steps we've taken to be a friendlier partner, if you will, in terms of the speed and creativity that we bring to conversion opportunities. And you look at the stack of conversion-friendly brands in the portfolio across quality sectors. I don't think it's an accident that something approaching 40% of our signings and openings are coming from conversion, whether those be conversions from competitive brands or conversions of independent. And I think that'll continue to be a really strong part of the story. But to your specific question, economic uncertainty, interest rate environment, construction cost environment, and the comment I made earlier about the destruction of enterprise value as a result of the pandemic. I mean, we have the greatest development partners in the world. They are prolific. They are committed to the industry with a multi-decade perspective. But in some cases, they're still trying to repair the damage that was done by the pandemic before they think about putting new shovels in the ground. It's not about the availability of equity. It's not about a long-term belief in the fundamentals. It's really about sort of cleaning up their houses a little bit, and it's made it quite tough.
Yeah, I think all very well said. I had Mitch Shaw of Noble Investment Group and Greg Friedman of Peachtree Hotels on recently, and we were talking about how the last year in particular has been tough for certain U.S. hotel owners. And, if you look at just the public companies,
Right.
You look at Hilton, you've done exceptionally well. You look at Booking, Expedia, Airbnb, they've done exceptionally well. Effectively asset-light type companies, but the lodging REITs themselves, you could argue part of that may be the float is too small for some of them. But absent that argument, they've done not great. That's probably an undergeneralization. How do you see that?
Yeah, although interestingly, our friends Jim and Nate and the team at Host had earnings yesterday, and they had a terrific day.
Oh, yeah.
I think their stock was up 5 or 6% yesterday, and they raised guidance. And so I read the transcript and I listened to their call, and to me, there were a few really valuable themes that came out of that discussion. I think number one, their commitment to investment in their assets, their focus on building and maintaining a portfolio of institutional grade assets, and the importance of having the right brand affiliations. The value of all of that was really revealed in their performance, which I thought was an encouraging sign for the industry broadly.
I totally agree. And anyone who's listening in, I'd encourage you to go listen to the Host earnings call. I think that was a big green shoots moment for a lot of folks out there.
Agreed.
So you had mentioned your opportunity internationally. You've been traveling a lot internationally.
Yeah.
Hopefully I get this right. I think APEC represents only about 8% of your current footprint, but 15% of your pipeline.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're seeing large RevPAR growth there. How are you thinking about capital allocation, development opportunities as you kind of go east? And what does that mean for Marriott? I mean, if you think about iconic brands in the United States, you're up there. How does Marriott evolve over the next decade or so as you move more international?
Yeah, I mean, just when I think about the relative runway for growth, we've got approaching a 20% market share here at home in the US, and we've got low single-digit market share in the rest of the world. So it's not an accident that more than 50% of that global pipeline is international. And I think from a mix perspective, that percentage will continue to grow. That doesn't mean we don't think we have lots and lots of opportunity for growth here at home, but the runway is infinitely longer. You think about the thousands and thousands of hotels we have to offer our guests here in the US versus a market like India. We're the biggest lodging company in India, and we've got 150-ish hotels. So the runway to continue to grow in a market like that is, I can't see the end of that horizon. So it's quite exciting. And in many of those markets, when you look at the profile of owners, there's not a significant call for MI capital participation. And so the returns on that growth are quite compelling as well.
Yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't turn us to AI. Everyone's talking about it. If you look at the S&P 500, 10 companies account for more than 70% of the year-to-date returns. I mean, unbelievable. We are seeing a little bit of a short pullback the last couple of days. Expedia and OpenAI announced a partnership, I think in the last 90 days. Booking.com is powering TikTok. How do you see Marriott in this world of AI?
Yeah, if you'll indulge me, I might ramble a little bit because it's such a
Sure, absolutely.
fascinating topic. Drew Pinto and Peggy Rowe, two of my direct reports, dragged me out to Silicon Valley 2 months ago. And we spent a couple full days meeting with Google and Adobe and NVIDIA and OpenAI and Meta. And it really is almost mind-boggling how impactful these emerging technologies are going to be on every sector of business, including travel, to be sure. In my meeting with Google, they shared with us their best guess is in the last 5 quarters, they've made 30 years of advances in artificial intelligence. So it's not just extraordinary technology in terms of the impact it can have. The pace at which it's evolving is unlike anything I've seen in my career. Now, as you know, for our vertical, we've got a unique additional layer of challenges in figuring out how to incorporate these emerging technologies into our business. And that is that thankfully we are in the human connection business. Because we're in DC, we get lots of students that sort of cycle through Washington, and they'll spend time on Capitol Hill, and then they'll meet with some of the big employers. And I had a big group of MIT students come visit us. And so they toured headquarters, and I did an hour Q&A with them at the end of their visit. And this one very bright young man raised his hand and he said, with all the advances in machine learning and AI and robotics, can you imagine a day where you can run a hotel with no employees? You know, and I sort of grinned and I said, I sure hope not, because we really are in the human connection business. So in some ways, I think about these emerging technologies principally through the lens of capacity creation. Can we take some of these manual processes that have forever been done, you know, either by hand or with a 10 key or on a laptop, push those to AI? And to be sure, we will find some efficiencies, and we need to because of the margin pressure that our owners feel. But a lot of the incorporation of that technology, I believe, will allow our frontline associates to do what they do best. If you create 30 or 60 or 90 seconds that they don't have to be staring at a screen, and as a result, they can provide that warm, genuine greeting when you arrive after a long, tough day of travel. Because they're looking at you and not looking down, they can pick up on verbal and visual cues in a way that they can try and enhance your stay. To me, that's among the biggest opportunities we have. We are experimenting in many facets of our business. You think about our customer engagement centers, our call centers. We've added a test module now with Marriott Homes and Villas with plain language capabilities using AI. We've done some proofs of concept with functions like the concierge desk. And so we'll continue to experiment. Where the real transformational opportunity exists, I think, is in around trip planning. I think there is a view that for all of us, there's an opportunity, certainly for the hotel companies, to expand our relationship with you beyond the time when you walk through the door and you exit the door at the end of your stay. And AI will be a great enabler of that. And then the last thing I'll say is personalization. I think as the travel consumer continues to evolve, they will crave that personalization. And all of us have such rich data available to us. AI will be the boat that'll help us navigate that deep, broad data lake.
I agree with you that first, I think the human experience, we have travel in our DNA. We're travelers, we're explorers as a species. And then that connection, that human to human connection is so paramount.
I love hearing you share something I say quite often, this desire to travel the world being embedded in our DNA. I sort of laugh. I have a daughter in her early 20s who loves to travel, but I think she genuinely believes travel became popular when Instagram launched, right? In the early days of the pandemic, I'm fascinated with the Roman Empire, and so I took advantage of being grounded for a few months to try and read some of the books that I've collected over the years. And there was a quote in one of those books that I was so taken by, I literally jotted it down. I carry it around in my briefcase. And it was the Roman philosopher Seneca. And Seneca said, travel and change of place impart vigor to the mind. And it's a great quote, but part of what I like about that quote, it's a really profound reminder. Travel didn't become popular in the last century. It's really sort of, exactly as you said, it's embedded in our DNA. this desire to explore new places, try new foods, immerse ourselves in different cultures, try to learn a new language. All these sorts of things are part of the human condition. And if you fundamentally believe that, notwithstanding the short-term turbulence we see, it's hard not to be optimistic about the future of travel.
Oh, 100%. If you look at the younger generation, they spend their money on experiences.
And when we look at the spending data from our credit card partners at American Express and Chase, it's really expanding across every demographic. One of the terms I hate was revenge travel, because that suggested it was going to be a finite set of circumstances. I think it's a much more fundamental and permanent sociological shift. I think when people were locked down during the pandemic, maybe they weren't buying as many watches and handbags and shoes, and they didn't miss it as much. But boy, did they miss getting on the road and traveling.
Oh, 100%. Now, I think I pulled this correctly off your latest earnings call. Marriott Bonvoy, your loyalty program, has just eclipsed 260 million.
That's
members.
right.
If we go back to 2017, that was 110 million. So exponential growth, kudos. That's one of the richest data sets in travel. Listening to AI experts, the data is key. You know, data and energy seem to be two limiting factors as how far can AI go. How will AI help you understand all that data and how it's used, and how are you thinking about loyalty today?
In some ways, the simplest answer is AI is invaluable because of the sheer volume of data that's available to us. We've got this incredibly deep data lake, but if we're not able to collect and sort of massage and synthesize that data in ways that help us personalize the experience for our members, then shame on us. And AI is a critically valuable tool to help us do that. Loyalty is a fascinating evolution. I think for all of the big travel companies, whether hotel companies, airline companies, car rental companies, in its infancy, loyalty was a pretty rudimentary platform, right? It was meant so that if you stayed with us, you earned some points. Over the passage of time, you collected those points, and eventually you redeemed those points for a future hotel stay. And that facet of loyalty is still foundational to Bonvoy, but shame on all of us if we don't evolve exponentially beyond that and turn it into a much more emotional relationship we have with our members. One of the ways you tap into those emotions is using really thoughtful partnerships to open up a world of once-in-a-lifetime experiences. And so that's a lot of the partnerships you've seen us add to the Bonvoy ecosystem over the last number of years, establishing that emotional connection. Whether that's being the official hotel partner of the NFL and having members be on the field when the confetti launches, whether it's about taking members on a curated tour of the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky, or whether it's sponsoring the Taylor Swift Eras Tour and giving our members the opportunity to take their kids and sit in the first few rows. Those sorts of unique, once-in-a-lifetime experiences really strengthen the relationship we have with our...
Yeah, in this new world, who owns the data? The booking channel,
Yeah.
the brand, the hotel owner, the consumer?
In this highly regulated world we live in,
Yeah.
the consumer owns their data. There is zero question about that. Now, all of us will try to make a compelling case to that consumer to give us permission and share that data. But to be clear, the data is clearly owned by the consumer.
If you think about AI and how it is disrupting various industries, I think part of the headwind that certain industries face are the legacy tech stack. You have mature businesses where you have to have an evolution of that. And you guys are focused on a couple of things: Marriott Growth Platform, MGP, and your digital tech transformation, DTT, is a big focus of you and your team. Can you give us a bit of an update on those
Of course.
plans?
Fundamentally, the initiative is the replatforming of our three most important systems: our central reservation system, our property management system, and our loyalty platform. As you point out, it's a multi-year transformational effort to, we believe, catapult us ahead of everybody in the industry in terms of the functionality, the intuitive nature of all these tools. And we think there are tremendous benefits to all of the constituents we serve. When we think about our associates, particularly that next generation of prospective associates, this is a generation of the workforce that has grown up perfectly comfortable opening a box for a technology product and not rifling around for the instructions, because they're confident that that technology in that box is intuitive and they can learn it in 30 seconds. This will be a huge competitive advantage for us as we think about this war for talent for the next generation associate, having these state-of-the-art intuitive tools. For our guests, the ability to have at our associates' fingertips the entirety of their travel history and be able to customize and personalize to meet their expectations and hopefully exceed those expectations, it's a big win. And for our owners, we think there's tremendous opportunity, certainly from a margin perspective, but the piece that I don't think gets talked about enough is the revenue upside that exists from a central res system on two fronts. Number one, the ability to merchandise and price room types in a way that is reflective of the unique inventory that many of these hotels have. And number two, you think for a guest coming to visit us, think about all the products and services that we want to make available to them. Of course, the room, but food and beverage, spa, golf. If they have the best night's sleep they've ever had, maybe they want to buy the Ritz-Carlton bedding package. And this is a consumer who has been trained by the likes of Amazon to be able to shop in multiple storefronts and drop those purchases into a single basket. That's sort of the spirit of what the new central reservation system will look like. And the fact that you're able to access all those products and services in the booking path, I think reflects tremendous revenue upside.
That's exciting. I think about companies that do it really well in terms of predictive customer is Netflix when it comes to media, and then Amazon in retail.
And I wish I could tell you that the timing of these technology transformations was a result of us having a crystal ball that knew AI was going to be exploding. It most certainly is not, but it is really tremendous opportunity in terms of the overlap of our initiatives and the rapid emergence of AI, because it allows us to build these platforms in a way that should be seamless.
Yeah, well, they say luck is really just where preparation and opportunity meet. So
yeah, although I'm not sure any of us could have predicted the speed with which AI is rolling out, but pretty exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Agreed. Last question, then I want to pivot to leadership. I apologize. This seems like a gross oversimplification, but Marriott versus Airbnb versus Google versus OpenAI, like who wins the battle for travel planning? Because you guys all know how a consumer decides a hotel.
I think the reality is this. I don't think it's a zero-sum question. I don't think there's one winner and a pile of losers. I think there is a place in the travel ecosystem for each of the types of companies you described. There are attributes that I think will be critically important to thriving in this new world. I think scale matters tremendously. I think an understanding of the wants and preferences of your guests matters tremendously. State-of-the-art technology matters tremendously. I think a global perspective, and in the case of a hotel company, a global footprint matters tremendously. And I like our odds in that evolving landscape because we fundamentally control the stay, which I think is going to be critical to thriving in this exciting new world of travel.
I really want to pivot to leadership because of all the companies that I interacted with when I was CEO of Remington for 8 years, and I'm not being paid to say this, listeners, I really admire the culture and the approach that Marriott has always had, going back to the Marriott family and then with Arnie and then yourself. First you took over and COVID was still around.
Yeah, February of 21.
Yeah.
We were right in the middle of it.
And, Arnie being an amazing leader, yet you've moved the company even further forward. How do you keep hundreds of thousands of employees motivated? And then how do you keep yourself? Because I think a lot of our listeners will listen in and say, wow, how does he lead such a large organization? It seems daunting.
Yeah, it's, I think back to that tragic period when we lost our dear friend Arnie, and we were facing what Bill Marriott had described as the most significant crisis the company had ever faced. And you're right, if I'd had to take on this role by myself, it would have been daunting. But we have extraordinary associates, hundreds of thousands of passionate associates who are so thrilled to have chosen careers in the service of others. And taking on the task that I was honored to be given, and knowing I had this army of passionate, long-tenured Marriott associates behind me. That's what gave me the confidence that we could fight our way through this incredible hole that was created by COVID. I think about this all the time, and I talk to Mr. Marriott about this all the time, who's had to navigate the company through regional and global conflicts, the impact of 9/11, the impact of the great financial crisis. And it really comes down to the company's core values and culture. And sometimes I worry, I think those have become buzzwords across corporate America and the world of big corporations. But for us, they really are our true north. And in times of crisis, in times of indecision, it's really following the true north of those 5 core values that our founders put in place almost a century ago. And that really guides how we think about moving the business forward. I say quite often, core values are etched in a block of granite. They never change. Culture, however, which is predicated on those core values, is a living, breathing entity. And I think the responsibility of any leader is to nurture that culture. The minute you're self-satisfied with the health of your culture, it's at risk of withering. And so part of what all the leaders at Marriott do every day, say, what can we do to continue to nurture and grow that culture that's so critical to what we do?
Having been a very large franchisee or franchise partner for years, I can tell you that focus of people, partners, and the human connection is ingrained. What's the hardest decision and or lesson that you've learned in your career?
I don't know about decision. Lesson, I suppose. For any of your listeners that have not watched it, I encourage them to go on YouTube and see the communication Arnie did in the early days of COVID. My guess is that video will be used at business schools for the next 50 years. He was obviously going through his cancer treatment. I think there were probably some communications folks that said, send out a written communication, because a lot of folks haven't seen your appearance as you go through this. And he said, absolutely not. I want to talk to our people in a very transparent, very candid way. I want to tell them what I do know, what I don't know. And, to me, on the long list of amazing lessons I learned from Arnie, the value of transparent communication, honesty with our people, it's just critical. And I think for any leader in any business, any organization, those organizations understand everything's not great all the time, but you owe your teams, you owe your associates, you owe your colleagues as unvarnished and truthful perspective on what's going on in the company and in the world as you can provide. And it's not always easy, but I think it is the key to success.
I completely agree. I was an intern for GE when I was going through school at Georgia Tech, and Jack Welch was the CEO at the time, and he talked to our intern class, and I remember him specifically saying it was at a point of nauseam that I felt like I said something and it sunk into the organization because he was leading such a big enterprise, and he really emphasized transparent, iterative communication just being a cornerstone to the success of GE, and that has stuck with me throughout my career.
I think the only other thing I would say, we are a massive enterprise, right? To successfully lead an organization like that, from where I sit, make sure they understand the task ahead. Not just tell them the strategy, but make sure they understand the intellectual underpinnings of the strategy and have a chance to challenge it. Once you've got everybody on board and endorsing the strategy, make sure the teams have the tools they need to get after that strategy. Make sure they know you're available as a resource, and then largely get out of the way. I think for a global enterprise, empowerment is critical. You cannot run a global enterprise like this with an attitude of command and control from center. It's just too big and dynamic a business to try and command everything from center. You got to put the right people in place and really empower them to do what they do so well. One of the great parts of my job is spending lots and lots of time with thousands of our general managers around the world. And one of the things I tell them every time, they are the CEOs of their business. The stark reality is the vast majority of our guests, probably to their great benefit, they'll never meet me or any of my leadership team. Their impression of our company is going to be based on a minute or two interaction with one of our frontline associates. And if that's your business, you better have amazing general managers who hire amazing associates, train them, retain them, and inspire them to provide extraordinary service.
We actually have a lot of general managers of hotels that listen to our show. It may be the number one job profile of our listeners, and many aspire to reach the heights that you've had. What would be some specific career advice for the GMs listening out that say, hey, I really want to be CEO of Marriott one day?
Yeah.
What would be some
Well, I
advice?
hate to give advice because I'm approaching a milestone birthday this year, and giving advice makes me feel older and older. But maybe I'd say two things. Number one, be relentlessly curious. The way I sort of describe it is be the person nobody wants to sit next to on an airplane, right? Because we all get on the plane and we put in our headsets and we watch a movie or we listen to music or we read or we do whatever. I love to chat with anybody I'm sitting next to because one of the things it reminds me of, we might know quite a bit about our narrow little industry, but you sit next to an executive from a grocery store chain and you realize you know nothing about their business model. And so having that intellectual curiosity in every human interaction you have, in the way that you fill your spare time and the types of things you read and consume, I just think that curiosity makes you a better business person, a better leader, a better person. And the second thing I would say is, and I think about this often through the lens of Arnie, he was the best listener I ever met. In those sad days and weeks after we lost him, I used to read all these beautiful tributes that were written. Many of them were from guests of ours who had met him in a porte cochere for 5 minutes. But during those 5 minutes, he put his phone in his pocket, he looked them in the eye, he really listened, he cleared his mind of everything else that was going on. And even if it was for 5 minutes, he really personally engaged. And as a result, that guest left having felt like they made a connection. And it's hard. Our life today is filled with distractions. But if you can be deliberate and clear your mind and really be an active, engaged listener, I think it gives you a tremendous advantage. And then the last thing I would say, again, I can't take credit for it, comes from Bill Marriott, one of my other mentors. I had Kate Walsh, the dean of the hotel school here in Washington a few years ago, and she'd never met Mr. Marriott. And she asked if it was possible, and I called him, and he said, of course, have her come in. And so they sat and spent about an hour talking about the industry. And at the end of their meeting, she said to him, I'm going to let you get back to work, but all the kids back in Ithaca know that I'm meeting with you today. And so the minute I get back on campus, they're going to say, what advice did he have? And she said, if there was one bit of advice I could take back to the future leaders in our industry, what would it be? And without pause, he got a little grin on his face and he said, tell them to be humble. And I think that's really strong, valuable advice for everyone, irrespective of what they do with their careers.
Yeah, I got a master's class from Arnie once. Was either 2014, 2015. The Connect conference was at the JW Indianapolis. I think Bruce White had just opened it.
Yep.
And I had lunch with him and several REIT private equity CEOs. I just happened to be lucky to be sitting at the table.
Yeah.
He got some serious pushback from a couple of the owners. And I remember how engaged, and he just asked a bunch of questions. Very clever questions, was not defensive, and completely disarmed the situation. And that left such a lasting impression on me.
But it was genuine. He was so curious. Asking questions is one of the best ways to satisfy your curiosity. I agree with you.
Well, we've come to the part of the show where we like to do some rapid fire. There's no right or wrong answers.
All right.
A fun way to close out the show. I guess I'll start with one of your recent brand launches. What are you expecting with the new outdoor brand that you guys...
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we did our first ever Bonvoy member day here at headquarters a few weeks ago. We brought about 100 members in. They were a diverse group. Some of them had joined Bonvoy 30 days ago. There was one gentleman I met that's been in some version of the program for 40 years. They were from ambassador to elites to silver members. And it was really kind of a 7-hour focus group. And we moved them around different areas of headquarters, showed them some of the technology changes, took them into the innovation lab. But the single most well-attended and active session we did was around the outdoor collection. And it was really insightful just to see how much passion there is among our members for these authentic, active experiences. Of course, there are many travelers whose dream vacation is to lay on a beach and have a drink with an umbrella in it and soak up the sun, and that's great. And we have lots of opportunity for that. But particularly younger demographics, they have this growing desire for active experiences when they travel. And I think the outdoor collection and its ability to tap into passion for skiers, for snowboarders, for hikers, for surfers, all those sorts of things, I've got really high expectations. I think the opportunity for us is to not only mine that data-rich environment we have to understand the passions of our members, but to offer them opportunities to live out those passions in our hotels.
Yeah, and you guys also launched Ritz-Carlton Cruise.
Yeah.
You also
Although
came out.
don't call it cruise.
Oh,
They are not
okay.
cruise ships. Ritz-Carlton yacht.
Yacht.
They
Sorry.
are like having a really wealthy friend with a really beautiful yacht. But I've had the chance to tour them. They are spectacular. And it's a really authentic, curated experience. No showrooms, no casinos, no buffets, Michelin star restaurants, amazing excursions, incredible itineraries. And the relative scale of the ships allows them to get into some ports that some of the large cruise lines don't have access to. It's just a terrific experience and a great
Yeah,
brand builder for Ritz-Carlton.
my wife keeps forwarding me the website, so I need to probably take a hint.
Good, let's get you on board.
What do you think's next for the Marriott brand?
The term I always use is adjacencies, right? And we are constantly exploring opportunities that are adjacent to our core lodging business. When we consider a brand extension or a business extension, there's kind of two lenses we apply to it. Is it adjacent enough to our core business that we feel like we have permission? And is it scalable? I'll give you an extreme example. There's a lot of money to be made in the web server business. Hard for me to imagine we're ever going to launch Marriott Web Services, right? It's not adjacent to our core business. We don't have
Right.
expertise. We don't have permission. But homes and villas, outdoor collection, Ritz-Carlton Yacht are all good examples of those adjacencies. The one that we've just launched, it's in its infancy, but I think it's a good example of the creativity that the teams are bringing to these evaluations is the Marriott Media Network. And so you think about the way marketing has been turned upside down in this world of social media, and you talk to expert marketers, what do they care about? Real estate and eyeballs. And so we've got 1.7 million rooms, which means we have 1.7 million television screens worth of real estate, and we've got about a little more than 250 million members in Bonvoy, which means we have access to 500 million eyeballs. And so the ability to have highly curated, relevant marketing content on that real estate, I think is a real opportunity for us.
I love the evolution. That's how, if you look at like Amazon and Google, I mean, even the tech, they've done adjacency that have been exceptional. So
Yeah, I
kudos.
don't think any of us should ever stop reminding ourselves that Amazon started as an online bookstore, and that's all it was. But they have leveraged the opportunity to understand what their customers want and to move into adjacent businesses.
What do you think the biggest trend in hospitality right now that you think maybe is overrated? And then is there any trend that you think is maybe underrated?
Yeah, I don't know about overrated. I mean, I think the idea of revenge travel was overrated because it stopped short of recognition of this fundamental shift in what consumers want and how they want to prioritize their discretionary spending. I think there's an opportunity. If you and I get to do this again in a couple years, I hope we'll look back at the tape and I will have told you I think there's an opportunity for us to, in a few years, say hotel dining was underrated. I think many consumers today look at food and beverage options within hotels as maybe a choice of last resort. If it's raining or they don't want to leave the building, okay, I'll eat in the hotel restaurant. I think some of the things we're doing with really creative partners, we've got an opportunity to shift the narrative about how travelers think about hotel dining.
And if you weren't CEO of Marriott, because hotels and hospitality gets in your
Yeah.
blood. I went to school for engineering and finance and
Yeah.
somehow ended up being a CEO of a large hotel company, and I can't leave. I can't get enough. But if you couldn't, would you be a doctor or what?
Definitely not. I would probably, our family's very fortunate. We own a little farm in Tuscany, south of Florence, and we have vineyards. I think I'd just be a winemaker.
I'd be afraid I'd drink all the product.
Yeah, well, I think our little vineyard generates about 1,700 bottles a year, so you'd have your work cut out for you.
That's phenomenal. I find the boutique wineries often the best.
Yeah, agreed.
I make an occasional trip to Napa.
Have you ever met Peter Kern that used to run Expedia? He was the longtime CEO of Expedia. He might be my hero because he now owns a spectacular vineyard in Montalcino called Il Palazzone that makes an incredible Brunello. So that's not a bad backup plan.
Well, Tony, I really appreciate you being on the show today. I appreciate everything that you do for the industry and your leadership and your team. And we close out every show with, what are you not done with? So when you hear not done, what comes to mind for the future of Marriott?
You know, there's a few phrases that have guided this company for 98 years. Some from our founders, J.W. Sr. and Alice Marriott, many from Bill Marriott. But when I hear the name of your podcast, I think about maybe Bill Marriott's favorite phrase, which is success is never final. This idea that we should never be self-satisfied, we should push forward each and every day. And if we do that, we'll continue to create tremendous opportunities for our associates, for our guests, and our owners. So I would say success is never final.
Love it. Thanks, Tony.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.